Hello, very warm welcome to Granada Reports.
Hello, on the programme this evening.
He's due to face questions at the inquiry this week. It now emerges the older brother of the arena bomber is no longer in the country. He's urged to make contact.
As he surely must understand, if he does not do so, the public may infer that he has something to hide.
Exhausted and on their knees, the teachers facing a wave of winter sickness.
People's mental health is being affected due to exhaustion, overworked and anxiety.
Just 5 years old and raising money in memory of his dad. Don't miss George's important message for us tonight.
And the previously unseen pictures shown the breakup of the Beatles in a different light.
So stay with us. First tonight, though, where is Ismail Abedi? He's the older brother of the terrorist who killed 22 people at the arena bombing. He's due to give evidence at the ongoing inquiry, but it's now emerged that he's left the country.
Yes, Ismail Abedi had been due at the hearing this week as it examines how Salman Abedi, who carried out the attack, became radicalised. We
can cross live now to our correspondent, Amy Welch. So, Amy, what has been said about this today?
Well, Ismail Abedi was due to give evidence on Thursday, but today the inquiry heard how he isn't actually in the country. Now, he has previously asked for assurances that if he gives evidence, he'd be given protection from prosecution, but that request was refused and an order was made demanding that he give evidence. Today, Paul Greeny QC, the counsel to the inquiry, made this statement asking for his cooperation.
We urge him today, sir, to make contact with the inquiry legal team, either directly or through his own legal representatives. As he surely must understand, if he does not do so, the public may infer that he has something to hide, and so, sir, may you.
Well, the chairman of the inquiry, Sir John Saunders, was quick to remark that statements shouldn't be made that may further deter Ismail Abedi, seen here with his brothers, from giving evidence. But of course, the question some people will be asking is why has he been allowed to leave the country in the first place?
And Amy, there are two other men with links to the bomber Salman Abedi who are due to give evidence this week.
That's right. One of those men, Ahmed Tagdi, was arrested yesterday trying to leave the country. Now, he was allegedly involved in buying the car that Salman Abedi used to store the materials he used to make the bomb. That's something he's always denied having any knowledge of. He did have a return ticket and said he was planning to come to court and give evidence, but now he's in police custody. He will be made to do so. Meanwhile, another of Abedi's alleged former associates, Abdul Rauf Abdallah, has also been ordered to give evidence tomorrow. Abdallah is a convicted terrorist whom Abedi visited twice in prison in the months leading up to the attack. His lawyers have tried to argue that he shouldn't be made to give evidence because it's an infringement of his human rights and that he may be at risk of self-harm or suicide. But the chairman has insisted that he too should be made to give evidence.
And Amy, the inquiry's been hearing from an expert on radicalisation today.
That's right. Dr. Matthew Wilkinson is an expert in Islamic extremism, and he tried to give some context as to what may have caused Salman Abedi to become radicalised. He said the vast majority of Muslims are completely against violent Islamist extremism, and that what Abedi did here at the arena goes completely against all the traditional teachings of Islam.
From a mainstream Muslim point of view, that type of activity would constitute three grave crimes. It would constitute murder, suicide, and causing corruption in the land, terrorism. So it's really an amalgamation of three of the most terrible crimes in Islam.
Well, Abedi wasn't a mainstream Muslim. He'd instead chosen to follow a distorted ideology of the so-called Islamic State. So what made a man born in Manchester turn against his own city? Well, that is something this next chapter of evidence will examine in more detail. We'll hear from his former teachers, his former mosque, who will look at why he became radicalised and whether there were missed opportunities to spot those signs of radicalisation and whether ultimately he could have been stopped.
Yeah, we'll be following those developments. Amy, thank you.
Well, next tonight, and teachers are exhausted, anxious and on their knees is the stark warning from the head of the school in Greater Manchester, in an area with some of the highest COVID infections, as a wave of winter sickness sweeps through schools.
Yeah, 13 teachers were off sick at Kings Road Primary in Stretford last week. Every class has a number of pupils off ill. The school has already spent most of its budget for supply staff in just the first 6 weeks of term.
Schools are also worried the symptoms for winter viruses are very similar to COVID-19, and pupils are urged to get a PCR test before returning to school to stop the spread of infections, as our correspondent Elaine Wilcox now reports.
If you've had a cough or a runny nose, put your hand up if you've been feeling that way. Goodness me, I think that's everybody.
At this school in Stretford, they're seeing wave after wave of illness, from COVID to coughs and colds, with more than a dozen teachers off sick and 70 pupils ill. The head said they'd hoped for a fresh start this year, and it's already taking its toll.
Everyone truly is absolutely exhausted. So people are on the knees. The impact of that is on well-being as well, and mental health. So people's mental health is being affected due to exhaustion, overworked and anxiety. We don't know where this variant is going, this Delta variant, and it just seems to be picking up pace.
And even just the act of coughing takes it out of them, and then they're shattered for the rest of the day.
It's been dubbed the worst cold ever by those suffering, with some pupils back in class before they're fully recovered.
Especially at this age when they're poorly, it affects the whole self. They want to fall asleep, they don't want to eat so much, they're feeling really emotional. So yeah, we are doing a lot of kind of looking after them in that sense.
And how difficult is it then to teach when that's going on?
Oh, it is really difficult. And obviously you have to understand the child is not in the right state to be learning either. So to try to kind of really plough on with that for that particular child is really difficult.
Just walking through this school, you can hear children coughing. Every year with a change in season, schools and universities become a hotbed for infection, with a sharp rise in colds and freshers' flu. But this year, medics say a super cold isn't spreading, but the symptoms are lasting longer and they're very similar to COVID-19, which makes testing more important than ever.
First thing that people need to do is make sure that they're not testing positive for COVID, and whether that means a lateral flow test or a PCR, they should get that done. Usually, like any other viruses, we're looking at somewhere between 5 to 10 days, and the body should be able to shift it.
The disruption and fears over rising COVID rates is also having an impact on pupils' mental health.
We've got children that are anxious and have found that transition difficult, and then are having to come into a classroom where there's a strange face because a member of staff is absent, and that is really unsettling for our children. And again, that suddenly the child suddenly got to go home, and not understanding, well, why have I got to go home again, and why are adults suddenly wearing masks again?
There's been a limited take-up of vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds in the Northwest, and many schools struggling with lost learning say that needs to happen quickly. Elaine Wilcox, ITV News, Stretford.
Well, the government says its data suggests school attendance has stabilised and the vaccination programme has already reached hundreds of schools. It strongly encourages anyone eligible to get it.
More news. A detective with Greater Manchester Police has been charged with child sex offences. Lee Cunliffe, who's 40, is a serving detective in Salford. The offences are alleged to have taken place between January and September last year. He'll appear before magistrates next week.
2 men had been arrested after a police car was rammed twice during a pursuit in Greater Manchester. It was badly damaged and an officer suffered an arm injury. They tried to stop the Land Rover in Sale.
Now, how about this for a powerful image? It's the giant puppet of a 9-year-old Syrian girl. She's arrived in the UK for the final stage of her long trek to the northwest. Little Amal, who is actually 3.5 metres tall, has arrived in Kent. She'll finish her 14-week journey in Manchester next month, having travelled 5,000 kilometres across Europe to raise awareness of the plight of migrant children. It is such a powerful image, isn't it?
Such a powerful
Really
image,
moving.
and looking forward to her arrival in the northwest finally. We'll be following that one closely. OK, still to come tonight.
Speaking out to try to save lives, the former players who want to improve mental fitness in their sport.
And despite today's conditions, it has been feeling very mild out there today, but gradually it will be turning colder with more wet and windy weather on the way.
Now, many books have been written about one of the best-known presenters ever to have fronted Granada reports, the man known as Mr. Manchester, who was largely credited with helping to create the region's mix of music and clubbing.
Yeah, now there's a new book out about Tony Wilson, or Anthony H. Wilson, who founded Factory Records and the Hacienda nightclub, and somehow managed to fit in some television work around all of that. There was certainly never a dull moment when he was around. And Paul Morley has just written From Manchester with Love. He told me about a Tony that many people didn't know.
I like the quiet, private Tony that you could find eventually if you looked hard enough, because obviously he knew so many people and so many people knew him, and he was so famous in his own way, certainly in the Northwest. The idea of finding a less public, a less noisy Tony and find out what, where he actually was. I think in a way, there were so many Tonys in the book. I wanted to find a real Tony, the private Tony, the Tony that would disappear into his study or into the hidden gem and meditate almost before he exploded in public as the famous Tony Wilson.
He was always very proud of his Salford roots, and I think a bit amused that he became known as Mr. Manchester. And also he loved Liverpool as well, which I think people often forget.
Well, he had a lovely relationship with Liverpool, sort of love-hate, that thing. He liked to provoke people, especially people he loved, in a funny sort of way. So, the relationship he had with Liverpool, I think it was the Northwest. I think it was just that sense of wanting to put the Northwest at the centre of the universe and at the centre of that particular universe, Manchester and Salford. And I did love his commitment to Manchester, the idea of Manchester, what he called the project, even if really it was Salford originally for him. He understood that eventually it would be known as Manchester. And his commitment, his love for Manchester was just extraordinary. Even back in the 70s, when some of us thought it was crazy what he was doing, we couldn't understand what he was doing. Eventually, it all made a kind of sense.
I mean, he was an incredibly bright man, wasn't he? He did get into Cambridge after all, but as you say, I always think of him as a true northerner who cared so much about this part of the world.
Yes, he definitely wanted to promote it and promote. I loved his commitment to promoting Manchester. It was interesting in the 80s, there would be the sense that the local council would be competing as a city or a place with Stockport and Barnsley. And he really encouraged them to compete with Sydney and Paris and New York and think internationally and think big. And he had these dreams and ambitions to connect a new Manchester with the original modern nature of Manchester. And in his own way, he made it come true.
And musicians loved working with him, didn't they?
It was a gift to be able to say that you had collaborated one way or another with Tony. And sometimes you'd fall out with him and there'd be long periods of him sulking or you sulking or whatever it would be. But ultimately you achieved things that you could only have achieved because you knew and worked with one way or another Tony Wilson.
And it was never about money, was it? I mean, that expression, some people make money, some people make history. It could have been about him, couldn't it?
What he was interested in is a greater sense of worth and value and leaving something behind that changed the very nature of a city and made us all richer. So I guess ultimately he was generous in that sense. He wasn't interested in making only himself richer. He was interested in making as many people, certainly local people, in the Northwest as rich as possible as well, through knowledge and through information and through music and through making the city something special, to feel that you belonged to a really special city. Tony helped us understand we were part of something special and made it come true through sheer, willpower.
Paul Morley, it's been so lovely to talk to you. He has such a special place still in so many of our hearts. It's lovely to talk about him and to hear you talk about him. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yes. Was that a lovely trip down memory lane for you?
It was such a privilege to work with him. I've been very blessed with the men that I work with on Granada Reports, haven't I, Gamal?
Well, look, one thing you can say about Tony is that he's a very, very cool guy.
Yeah, 100%.
OK, here's Charlene with the details of the ITV News at 6:30.
Coming up, £5,000 to ditch your boiler. The government sets out its strategy to cut emissions. Heat source pumps for central heating, more electric vehicles and new nuclear power plants. But critics say that's not enough. Also ahead.
I admit it all.
Moments after she killed her husband, a court's shown the arrest of a woman who says he was coercive and controlling. And Ant opens up to Kate about addiction. Join us for those stories and more from 6:30.
Thanks, Charlene. Well, next tonight, the 5-year-old boy from Wigan who's playing golf to raise money in a very good cause.
Yeah, George Hughes is raising money in memory of his dad.
Our reporter Joshua Stokes caught up with him as he swung into action.
George was just 18 months old when his dad, Dave, died after complications with a heart transplant. Now, aged 5, he's putting his best swing forward in memory of his dad. Today, he'll be hitting 300 golf balls in 2 hours, all to raise money for the Freeman Heart and Lung Transplant Association.
I can't put it into words how proud I am. He loves playing golf, it's fun for him, so for a little event like this to come so big, it's just amazing.
While his dad awaited the operation, it was George's granddad who introduced him to golf, buying him his first set of plastic clubs and spending hours with him at Wigan Golf Club.
You could see he had a swing, then he was mithering to come to the golf club with me, so we went to the driving range, went to the golf club, and he just picked it up and he absolutely loves it. George talks about what happened to Dave with the heart transplant. He'll say his dad is in the stars. As a dad, he'd just be super proud of the way his son's turned out, not just for his golfing skills, but for his manner, the way he's helping his mum. It's an inspirational story.
Since Dave passed away, the family have raised over £53,000 in his memory.
Oh, he'd be so proud of you, Daddy, won't he? And that we've always carried on raising awareness of organ donation and the importance of sharing your wishes, and I think we always will do. Nothing will change.
Louise is now remarkably training as an organ transplant nurse, all doing their bit as a family in memory of a husband and a father taken far too soon.
What do you think Daddy said? What would he say? Wow.
Joshua Stokes, ITV News, Manchester.
Now then, if you think you know all about the breakup of the Beatles, and I know a lot of people who think they know everything about the Beatles, our next report may make you think again.
Yeah, our fascination with the Fab Four continues after all this time with the release of 3 films next month, the remix version of their final album Let It Be, and a new book featuring hours of transcribed conversations from their sessions in the studio.
Yeah, and I'm pleased to say that it all paints a happier picture of the band's final year or so together. It's really good to see. Here's Tim Scott.
And now your host for this evening, the Bottles.
Dropped during lockdown, a first glimpse of this amazing treasure trove of previously unseen Beatles footage featuring the band hard at work and play during the sessions for Let It Be. While some of the footage made it to the original Let It Be film, there was a whopping 50 hours of unused material locked away for over half a century until now. Not only that, but there were hours of audio recordings too, presented by Apple to journalist John Harris to edit for this book, The Beatles Get Back.
Well, the first point is, it's a good time to have the Beatles around, isn't it? The world's in a somewhat uncertain state. None of us are sure exactly where everyone's going. So to have the Beatles presented to us in this intimate way, I think will play quite a large part in maybe cheering people up.
John was given a mountain of notebooks full of transcribed conversations between the band that he whittled down for the book.
They had all of this recorded and text material reproduced in 120 hours of Beatles conversations. And they felt there was a book in this, and then over a period of weeks we talked about what form it would take. And we arrived at the idea of reproducing it as if it was a real life play.
What are people going to take away from your book and the film regarding the Beatles that perhaps they didn't know previously?
One of the great revelations of this is that this whole period up to now has been characterised as being a thoroughly miserable, awful, sort of wretched period, right? But for the most part, they get on really well. And music's pouring out of them. That's the other thing. The amount of smiles and laughs and sort of in-jokes and reminiscence and all the things that you'd see as being signs of a sort of healthy relationship, right? They're all there.
time frame for all this new material is January 1969. The Beatles were supposed to be getting a TV special together, but couldn't agree on where or how. So they got down to recording what would become Let It Be, and then played their last ever live performance on the roof of the Apple building in London. Despite the fun and the laughs though, the book does show a band who are thinking about just what will happen next.
The most moving parts are when they talk about where they are and where they might be going, and what might happen if they break up. Paul says, you know what's going to happen, don't you? In 50 years' time, they're going to say they broke up because Yoko sat on an amp. And you know what? That's, in terms of the Beatles mythology, that's pretty much what happened.
Do you want to do it once more then?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we'll never get a chance to do it again.
The book, The Beatles Get Back, is out now. The films will be available to stream next month. Tim Scott, ITV News.
Wonderful pictures.
Oh, amazing. Here's Amanda with the weather.
He's chucking it down. Might as well get on with them jobs, Gary.
Wipes in the bin, though. Oh, good lad.
United Utilities sponsors ITV Granada weather.
Hello again. So it has been very unsettled out there today with outbreaks of rain and blustery winds, but despite all of this, it has been feeling very mild. Those temperatures have been well above average for the time of year, but gradually as we go through the next few days it will be turning colder out there, and it remains fairly unsettled with further spells of wet and windy weather at times. So let's take a look at the bigger picture. We can see low pressure in charge of things at the moment, continuing to drive weather systems across the UK, bringing further spells of rain. And you can see the isobars, it will be windy too. But we'll start to see a change in wind directions. That's going to draw in much colder air. But on the plus side, hopefully, it will bring a little bit more in the way of sunshine. Now, in the meantime, let's come back to the rest of tonight. We've still got a few showers lingering, but for most of us, as we edge overnight, it will become largely dry out there, some clear skies, and that's with our temperatures ranging between 9 and 12 degrees. So tomorrow morning, there may be some dry weather around first thing, the hint of a little bit of brightness, but it won't be long before the clouds starts to increase. We will see some outbreaks of rain sweeping their way through, and some of this rain could be quite heavy. There may even be some hail and thunder out there too, and strong gusty winds. Now you can see as we go through the afternoon, this rain pushes its way north and eastwards, so behind it we're back to more of that mixture of sunny spells and blustery showers, but you can see the winds coming in from a more northerly direction, so not quite as mild as today. We're looking at highs there of 13 or 14 degrees, and then over the coming days we'll be a little bit more in the way of sunshine, but feeling colder by day and some pretty chilly nights. Bye-bye.
United Utilities sponsors ITV Granada weather.
He's doing us now.
Top fella.
Thanks, Amanda. Tomorrow we catch up with X Factor finalist Grace Davis, who wowed judges with her own song 4 years ago. She's finally releasing it.
For now, many thanks indeed for watching. Bye-bye.
Bye.